Putting on my top hat, tying up my white tie, brushing up my tail.
Welcome to Hatcast, the podcast about hats. I'm Charles Berman.
And I'm Carl Bernhardson, and we're here to talk about hats.
We're going to be talking about a different subject each week, somewhere in the realm of hats. Some of the subjects are going to take the form of discussions about one particular kind of hat or other peripheral areas in the world of hats. And I decided that we'd take this week as a subject, I think one that's close to the hearts of every hat wearer and hat lover.
The bowler.
The bowler hat. Before we do that, we always are going to begin by talking about what hat we're wearing today, which is going to broaden our horizons of the hat beyond the narrow subject that we pick for each individual episode. What hat are you wearing today?
Well, today I'm not wearing a hat, and I'd like to change that. And as we get farther along in this series, I'm going to have more hats to wear. But as of right now, I am sans hat.
I'm not wearing one now because we're indoors, but today's hat is manufactured by Angela and William of New York. What would you call this? Is sort of a hybrid. What would you call that?
It's kind of like a flat cap, but with flaps. Maybe a flap cap.
A flap cap. Yeah, it's a flat cap on top with I think you would say a dark brown, blue, and tan check.
Yes,
and it's lined inside.
Is that real fleece or probably imitation?
Probably imitation. Yeah, it's made of 35% wool and 65% acrylic. Okay. So it's not all wool, but it does have that natural warmth of wool involved in it. And it comes down and has flaps to cover your neck and ears. And then out of the same material of the hat are strings that you can tie the flaps on top of your head when it's not cold enough to warrant.
Right, and underneath your chin when it is cold enough.
So maybe we could even do a whole episode on this particular hat.
I'm sure as we start running out of ideas, we'll just start talking about our own personal hat collections.
Doubt that could happen. Well, let's talk about the bowler. What are your personal associations with the bowler hat?
Well, I mean, there are the obvious ones. I was a big fan of the movie Mary Poppins when I was young.
Oh, yeah, so was I.
The bankers wore bowlers,
hats.
And I just really, really wanted to go to work in a Edwardian bank when I was a boy. So I really thought that I would look good in a bowler.
I did love that film, and I remember the bowler hats in it, but my association initially with the bowler hat was Laurel and Hardy, which I don't know if you ever watched them.
No, I haven't seen much.
They were mainly film comedians from the 1920s. Their prime was the 1920s and 30s. They went up through 1950. And they both wore bowler hats, which actually Stan Laurel's hat, which was an Irish children's derby.
Really?
Yeah.
For kids?
And you could tell it was different because the hat brim was not curved up on the ends, and it was a sort of a taller hat. But it lent them a sort of a dignity that was a great contrast with the slapstick and childishness and silliness that was associated with their characters.
Right.
And it contributed to the comedy just by being there and lending an air of dignified grace to them. And I wanted a bowler hat very much, and I got my first, which I still have, back when I was a child at a hat store in Massachusetts for, I think, $40.
Really?
Yeah.
That's pretty reasonable.
Not a bad price.
Yeah.
We should discuss the appearance of the bowler hat for those who don't
you might not be familiar with it. Yeah.
But it's black. It's usually a black hat. It's not always black. And there are particular uses for certain colors of bowler hats when we get to St. Patrick's Day.
Okay, yep.
The famous green bowler hat is associated with leprechauns.
Right. But when you find them in the wild, it's 90% of the time going to be black.
A black hat.
It's rounded on the top.
Yes, and it has a brim which curls up on the sides.
It isn't floppy at all.
No. And I've seen floppy versions of it.
Isn't that kind of contrary to the whole idea behind the bowler initially?
Yes, it is, which we'll get to. And it tends to be made of felt. I've seen variations on the bowler hat. I have even seen a straw bowler hat.
Like a boater bowler.
Yes, it's exactly the shape of a bowler hat, but made of straw. Which I don't know. I think I would wear that.
It sounds a little silly, but, I mean, wearing a bowler at this point would sort of make you stand out, so why not have it made of straw?
Yeah, and it's a good summer hat if you want the bowler look, because the bowler hat, I speak as someone who's worn them, is very warm.
Right.
So the cultural associations of the bowler hat for today, I think, what do you think most people think of?
Edwardian England, I think, is sort of the hat that you think of 1910. Right?
Yeah, it has a large number of associations, and I think they all play into it. My first exposure that gave me an attachment to it was Laurel and Hardy, who I still have an attachment to, but it was also very associated in film with
Charlie Chaplin.
Charlie Chaplin always wore a bowler hat. But that's not its end in comedy. It's also seen a lot on John Cleese.
Right.
In Monty Python, because it's associated with
authority figures, right?
Authority figures, button-down British banking types, chartered accountants. It was for years part of and not just in the Edwardian era, but from the mid-Victorian era up through, I would say maybe around the 1960s, was part of the uniform of a British businessman.
Right.
With a three-piece suit. Let's take a look at the history of the bowler a little bit, because there's a lot to discuss.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that I want to know as we're diving into the history is, how did it become so ubiquitous for so long? And because, hats tend to come and go faster than other, parts of apparel.
Well, part of it, I think, is that when we can go beyond fashion at that time. We can go beyond just hats into general fashion at that time for the uniform of the English businessman. And the bowler hat wasn't just an English phenomenon. I've seen it was worn a lot in the United States and Canada, and I've even seen images of Mussolini wearing a bowler hat. The uniform didn't change very much over time. It was pretty stable. And the bowler hat was part of that. I think it's a good-looking hat also.
Yes.
I like the look of it, and I think just on a basic aesthetic level that must have contributed to it. The bowler hat was designed in 1849.
So it's earlier than the time that you would associate with it. I guess it would have had to arise before it became popular.
Well, it's now associated, I think, with a level of formality. But at that time, it would have been associated with a lower level than the top hat, which was a little bit more de rigueur. And one thing about it is that you'll often hear it called, not often, you'll sometimes hear it called a coke hat.
And why is that? Because
it was designed by London hat makers Thomas and William Bowler. First of all, that's the reason for the bowler hat. It was commissioned by a customer to design a close-fitting, low-crowned hat to protect gamekeepers from low-hanging branches, while on horseback at Holcombe Hall, the estate of Thomas Coke.
Okay, so a coke hat.
Yeah, so it gets called either.
So a floppy bowler really is not in the spirit of a bowler.
It's not in the spirit of the original design of the bowler. Now, Wikipedia says the tradition of wearing bowler hats with city business attire ended during the 1970s. I don't think it ended. I think it diminished. Have you seen bowler hats in the wild?
I haven't, apart from yours.
Okay, yeah.
Which I wouldn't consider the wild, as another hat aficionado.
Yeah, I have seen them in the wild. But I think today they tend to have an association with eccentricity.
And it is interesting that something that was the absolute opposite of eccentricity would now be... But I guess that's anything that's out of fashion would be eccentric.
If you were to wear a bowler hat... You don't have a bowler hat, do you?
I don't.
If you were to wear it, what would be the context in which you would wear it?
I probably wouldn't wear it with my business suit.
You wouldn't wear it at all. No, okay. I think, and I'm biased because I do wear it, I think wearing a bowler hat with a business suit just lends it a further air of dressiness and spiffiness. I think it's nice.
I would fear that it would come across as a little bit costume.
Precious or okay. I have seen them in the wild, and I have seen business people wear them because I tend to notice them when I see them because I'm a fan of this particular kind of hat.
Yeah, I feel like if you wanted a hat that's going to sort of lend a little bit of, gravitas to your suit, but not sort of alienate people around you, a Homburg or a larger wool fedora would be what you would use now.
Okay, right? Do you think a bowler hat would be alienating?
I think people would look at you and say, "Who is this time traveler man?" It would set you apart faster than something that people are more familiar with seeing.
It would set one apart, but I think it's a familiar enough sight that I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I think it's appropriate to wear, for instance, to a wedding or to a job where you have to dress up.
Right. I guess a wedding, yes. I could see wedding. Weddings are, especially a formal wedding, if you're moving more in that direction and it's a daytime thing.
Now, I will say, I think the bowler hat calls for a certain level of dressed upness in the rest of your clothes.
I'm not sure. I think you could wear it with just casual clothes. If you... I feel like that would even be... I feel like it would be less strange to see someone wearing it with just casual clothing as a way to protect their head from bumps and to keep the sun out of their eyes.
Well, I think... No, I don't agree with you there.
I would be more shocked to walk into a business meeting and see a man wearing a bowler than I would be walking down the street seeing a casually dressed young man with a bowler hat.
Well, all right. I think someone wearing it in the meeting is doing it wrong. And I don't know if I've seen someone wearing a bowler hat in a meeting.
Right.
But for instance, I just watched MasterChef UK last week, and there was a guy wearing a bowler hat in the kitchen while he cooked on the show. And that's
the wrong place to wear.
That's the wrong place. He looked fine in the hat.
It's a good-looking hat.
Yeah. He looked good wearing it, but it's odd to wear it while cooking. And the presenter said, "You're wearing a hat. Why?" And he just said, "Well, I like hats. That's fine."
Right. Well, there are some hats that you wear cooking.
Yes, a chef's hat, which we'll do an episode on. It's completely normal to wear. I don't know if it's normal to wear. I don't put one on to cook, but
people wouldn't say... They might say, "You're pretentious," but they wouldn't say, "Why are you wearing this hat?"
Right, they wouldn't say, "Why are you wearing this while cooking?" Maybe a bandana while cooking, a hairnet, which I don't know if you want to count as a hat. But I think a bowler hat, if you saw it on somebody wearing a t-shirt and jeans... I've seen this. Right. I think it looks out of place. But unless you've got at least a jacket and slacks.
Maybe a vest. I think it would look very good with a
vest. Maybe a vest, if it's a cardigan, if it's too warm for.
Yeah, I wouldn't just wear a t-shirt, but some kind of sweater.
Okay.
Something with buttons.
That would be fine. Yeah.
Pants.
Yeah. I have seen it on somebody with a t-shirt and a vest over the t-shirt. I saw outside.
No,
it's wrong.
I wouldn't. That's just.
And I think it should be black, generally. The Brown Derby is a famous California restaurant. It's also known as the Derby.
And why is
in
that?
The United States.
And the Brown Derby was a restaurant that was shaped like a brown derby, yes?
Yeah, it was. The Brown Derby was a chain of restaurants in Los Angeles. The most famous was shaped like a man's derby hat. And we're looking at a picture of it now. And it's very unusual to see in the street this enormous brown hat. And brown is a pretty conservative color.
Right.
And it's a good looking. I think the hat looks good with brown. If you've got a
brown suit.
Yeah.
And you don't see as many brown suits.
Yeah.
I guess could you have one in a midnight blue?
You could. A suit or a hat?
Either, but I was thinking the
Clearly
hat.
You could have, yeah.
I haven't seen one, but then again, like I said, I haven't seen one in the wild.
Well, it doesn't seem like anyone really knows for sure why it's called a derby.
Interesting.
Online Etymology Dictionary says derby as a type of hat manufactured in the U.S. 1850. Name appears 1870. perhaps from the annual Derby horse race in England, where this type of hat was worn. Race was begun 1780 by the 12th Earl of Derby. And then it goes into a little more detail on the origin of the word Derby as a place name. But that's a little bit unknown. I call it a bowler.
Yeah, I haven't heard it called Derby as often as bowler.
Yeah.
But not as infrequently as Coke hat.
Yeah. It's also, it's associated with the Plug Uglies, a 19th century American street gang who wore bowler hats stuffed with cloth or wool to protect their heads while fighting.
See, there's it performing its role as a head protector.
I'm kind of surprised that Wikipedia says cloth or wool, since I think wool, I guess it could be sort of cotton wool or balls of wool. I don't know.
True, that hasn't been made into cloth yet. Yeah.
John Bonham, drummer for Led Zeppelin. I don't know about Led Zeppelin.
I don't know about them either.
Bing Crosby is a wearer. Alex, the protagonist of the Clockwork Orange.
That's right. It does feature. I haven't seen a Clockwork
Orange. Pretty
prominently
in it.
I
haven't seen it or
poster.
read it. Yeah.
And the book cover.
But I mean, that's part of an iconography of it, and that brings to mind, of course, Odd Job.
Oh, right. Yes.
From James Bond,
which
I also
deadly
haven't watched
bowler.
a lot. Yeah, he had and I don't think this would really work to kill people.
No, I think that's kind of fantastical. But
yeah, but he had a bowler where the rim was metal or some sort of
I think it was
steel,
like a blade, right? And he would throw it, and it would
cut people.
Yes.
I think if you were to make, well, first of all, it would be very obvious you had a shining blade around the edge of your hat. I don't know also who would make a blade that ovular.
Well, I'm sure he had to custom order it.
From even whom, I don't know.
Well, I forget, but who did he work for? I don't remember whose henchman he was.
I don't know. Oh, it says here, Auric Goldfinger's manservant.
Okay, Goldfinger. I assume he had money. He could have it custom made.
His name is Auric Goldfinger.
Oh, like the vacuum cleaner.
No, Auric.
Oh, like
as
gold.
Like, yes.
Yes, my name is Gold.
I wonder if his name was Auric Daedalus Goldfinger. But I don't think it would work. Even if you had that, you might possibly, scratch someone or ruin an article of clothing of theirs. But I don't think you would actually kill anyone that way.
No.
Which is a good thing. But that also tied into the Odd Job chain of stores, which I think is closed. But they had a picture of a bowler hat on them. And you could go there and buy. They were essentially ollies. You could go and buy odd job lots. Job lots that were odd.
Right.
Yeah. They were also associated with Son of Man. Are you familiar with that painting?
Son of Man. Is that the one with the man whose face is a fruit?
Yes. Son of Man is a painting by René Magritte, the Belgian surrealist. He actually did several versions of paintings, but it's usually a man with a suit and a red tie and a bowler hat, and his face is covered by a green apple. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on surrealism.
I like surrealism.
I do as well. I like the painting.
It is a good painting. We're looking at it now on the computer screen. Yeah.
I think in the dream imagery of that, the bowler contributes to the image of a uniform.
Right.
Which helps to create the facelessness of the person. If he were dressed very idiosyncratically, his face might still be obscured, but he'd be a little bit less faceless.
Right.
If that
he's more faceless by being uniformed.
Yeah, although now it would be perhaps a sign of eccentricity in dress, which is the paradox at the heart of the bowler.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think we've really struck on something here with...
Yeah. You're wearing a sign of conformity and uniformity, but because it's, in a sense, gone out of fashion, it's not... I think we should stress, it's not out of fashion like a tricorn hat.
Right. If I wore a tricorn hat, I would be very clearly in costume or partially costumed.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, I suppose you're right. I'll concede. You could wear a bowler and be thought strange, but not completely out of place.
I even think, and I'm biased here, I think you could be thought not even necessarily strange as much as well-dressed. Now, I am strange, but I think that the bowler doesn't necessitate strangeness. A tricorn hat
Yes.
is a flat strange.
Nobody wears that.
I used to own one.
I
People
have one around here somewhere.
Yeah, but I don't wear it as a hat just because it is entirely associated with a historical period. It's not...
Right. And I think the bowler is probably headed in that direction. I think in 50 years...
I think the bowler has reached a state of equilibrium.
I think it's just that there are still people living from the period of time when it was ubiquitous, right? And once they're all dead, it will be strange.
It might be.
Once it's passed out of living memory.
It might be. I think that since the 70s or 80s, the bowler has maintained its level of commonness.
Right. Well, I think in the 70s and 80s, it was probably an old man's hat.
Possibly so. But you would still see it on younger people at about the same level of commonness that you would see them today.
I think we're going to have to see if we can get some grant funding for an expedition to do a study on bowlers in the wild.
I would like that. Again, a lot of this is subjective, but I think that it's maintained a fairly even keel of commonness outside of British banker dress up or Wild West dress up.
Right. Oh, that's true. It has a pretty heavy Wild West connotation.
Yeah, associated
pretty much your civilians of the Wild West were all wearing a bowler.
Yeah, seen as connected with Bat Masterson.
Oh, that's another interesting thing about it. The bowler never had any military connotation. It's a solidly civilian hat.
It is a very civilian hat.
The peaked cap, which sort of started off as a civilian hat and then became military, but you still find in non-military contexts. But the bowler is pretty solidly for non-military people.
Yeah, and it's not like a kepi or anything like that that was very associated with the military. But it's a completely civilian hat. I think of it as a little more common than you do, and I've worn it just on occasions when dressing up.
Right.
And not dressing up in costume, but on occasions that warrant a higher level of register of clothing.
Right.
And I think it has not... It might have attracted comment, but I don't think it's attracted opprobrium or laughter.
True. All right, I'll you can win this one here. I'll concede.
Let's give I think we should give bowler hats a rating.
Oh yes. Okay, so we've got what, 3 criteria? 2 criteria?
Well, we've got 3. Well, what should we do? Should we do?
It was what? Practicality,
style, practicality,
and overall rating.
Yes.
Yes. Which we could just make an average of the two. Plus, plus arbitrary points.
Well, starting with style.
Oh, what's our scale?
1 to 10.
1 to 10.
1 to 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we doing percentages in there?
We can do that if you'd like. Yeah. Starting with style, where would you rate a bowler hat?
Very stylish. I'm going to have to give that probably an 8 or a 9. I'm going to settle on 9. I'm going
to sound like I'm grade inflating here, but I think I'm going to give it a 10.
This is the first episode.
I know,
and you are
handing
out a 10.
Can't think of any other hats that I would give a 10 to. I think the bowler is my favorite.
You can't walk it back.
No.
What if we discover? I mean, we're on a journey here to learn about hats.
I'm not ruling it out.
Do we make it 11?
No, I'm going to give it a 10, and others can tie it. If I discover a hat, I can't think of one now, and I'm flipping through hats in my mental Rolodex. If you imagine a Rolodex with pictures of hats pasted on the cars instead of addresses, I'm flipping through that, but I'm not imagining one. So I'm going to give it a 10, but I could walk it back. You're going to get a 9, which is still very high. I might give a 9 to, say, Hamburg. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I've already tipped my hand and let it be known that I like the Hamburg. But it's very stylish. It's round. It's not too tall. It looks good on any human body.
Right.
And women wear bowlers too.
In Bolivia, actually, even still, the bowler is very common for. It's usually a men's hat. We'll say that. But in Bolivia, it's very common for women to wear bowlers, even still, and it works. So yeah. Now I will say there's certain outfits that it doesn't. Should we give only a 10 if it goes with any outfit?
Well, this is where this is inherently subjective, and it can get as subjective as we want it to be. I would give it a 10 if you've got the whole thing.
I'll revise. I'll give it a 9.5.
Okay.
Because
it could be worn wrong.
It could be worn wrong, and I'm not gonna. Generally, the cultural associations. Generally, I think the character of someone wearing a bowler hat, I have good associations. This is entirely feeling based and subjective of me, but I do. There are some people, if they're wearing it wrong, that I might get a bad association. If you got a bowler hat with a leather jacket and a t-shirt and jeans, all the things I've worn, but I had not with a bowler hat, it might be less.
Oh, you know what? That sounds cool, right?
Maybe
that would get
cool.
some cool points.
Let's take the leather jacket off. If you're wearing it with a hoodie and a tracksuit pants.
Now I'm imagining the hood over the bowler and the sort of front part of the brim peeking out, and it's round, so it'd give your head. I don't know. I'm getting more and more convinced that this is
all right.
every day. And it's kind of a classless hat too.
Yeah,
everybody wore it. Rich, poor.
Yes.
If you could afford a hat, this was the hat you bought. I'm still sticking with a 9 because I'm not going to give out a 10 on episode 1, but yeah.
All right, practicality.
It's strong.
I give it a high rating.
How waterproof is it? It is felt.
It's felt, so it doesn't get your head does not get too wet, but it doesn't have a long brim.
Right.
So it's not. I'll say. Okay. So it keeps the water off your head, but it's kind of a nice hat. So you don't want to stand in the rain for very long while you're wearing it.
Right.
It's quite warm, which is good when it's chilly. When it's the summer, it can get rather warm to wear it.
Right.
It doesn't have a long brim, so it does not keep the sun very much out of your eyes.
Okay. So it doesn't have it. So it's functional in that it does provide protection. Now, whether you're, I assume when it was first done, it was you said for branches while riding a horse, but it would protect you if you're on a crowded bus and you're bumping into things.
Yeah, and it still has that value if you ride a horse while wearing it. Although the modern ones, I think, are a bit softer than the ones that would have been made at that time, so maybe that's come down a little bit. It's a bit of a high hat, which is good for how it looks, but
hard to wear in a car.
Hard to get into and out of a car with it.
That's we're going to have a whole episode on cars and hats because cars really are. I mean, that's sort of the 20th century versus hats right there.
We will have to do that episode. There's a story of that illustrated how cheap Groucho Marx was supposed to be. That he always left his hat in the car instead of paying to check it. It's also a hard hat. It's a stiff hat, which means that if you're in a place where you don't want to leave your hat on, well, let's say you're in a cafe, a casual cafe.
That doesn't have a hat rack for you.
It doesn't have a hat rack.
No coat check.
No coat check. You don't want to leave your hat on while you eat. But it also probably doesn't have very spacious tables. You don't want to leave the hat in the middle of the table.
Right. So I guess it doesn't get a ton of practicality points. But it's not impractical.
It's not impractical, and it covers those basics of keeping your head warm and keeping the things off your head.
Right, and looking good and being part of a uniform can be practical too.
Yeah,
I'm going to give it a solid 5 on practicality.
I was going to be a 6, but that has a nice symmetry with.
Yep, I think that fits with both of our appraisals.
Yeah, should our overall rating just be the average of our other ratings?
I guess the average of all 4 of ours.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
let's let the audience know neither of us are particularly swift at math.
So that was 10 plus 9 plus 5 plus 6
divided by 4.
30 divided by 4. So the overall rating gets a 7.5.
I think that's pretty solid.
That's pretty good. I don't know what else is going to get as high a rating as that. I could see something doing it.
Yeah. It'd have to be pretty exceptional.
Yeah.
I think that, we'll leave that up to the audience to speculate about.
In a future episode. Now, if you want to give us a call, if you want to write to us to comment on the bowler hat or to suggest future hats to talk about, future episodes, or to commentate on anything we've said or correct any historical inaccuracies, the email address is hatcast@yandex.com, hatcast@yandex.com.
Looking forward to hearing from you.
This has been Hatcast, the podcast about hats.
Where we talk about hats.
I'm Charles Berman.
And I'm Carl Bernhardson.
Goodbye.
Bye.
It gets so strong and comfy that I never take it off. It's